it's Carrie. Welcome back to my channel. Thanks for joining me. I do have electricity now, thank goodness. I did go a full 8 days without it, but I consider myself lucky because there were some families in this county and the surrounding counties who went a full 2 weeks without it. But everyone, I think as of today, has been restored, so that is good. I do want to thank all of my subscribers and other booktubers who popped over to my channel to leave a comment just checking on me and wishing me well during that time. That was very sweet and much appreciated. So I do have one shout out to give at the beginning of this video. I want to shout out to one of my subscribers named Carly, and I know that Carly is a really awesome reader because I hear from her dad. And I just want to say this could be you, Carly. You could have your own booktube channel one day, and if you do, I will definitely subscribe. So this week I do have 5 books to talk about because some of these books I read last week, so I'm just going to dive right in, or this could take a while. The first book that I want to talk about is We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, and this is a young adult mystery. There was a lot of hype around this book when it came out, and I will say that I definitely enjoyed this book. It does have a twist, but that's not really what had me invested in the book. Honestly, I was really trying to figure these characters out. Essentially, we're following a very privileged family called the Sinclairs who own a private island off the coast of Massachusetts. So that whole idea kind of had me thinking about the Kennedys and Hyannisport and, you know, their Kennedy compound, because at the beginning of this book you actually have a map, which is pretty neat, of this island with all the different houses on it, and they also include a family tree. The version of the book that I have also had a few extras in the back, some poems from some of the characters and stuff like that, which was pretty cool. So on this island, we are following the teenage characters of Cadence, Mirren, Gat, and Johnny. And most of these characters are cousins, they're related, they spend every summer together, but Gat is kind of the outsider. He is related to one of the aunts' significant other, and so he comes to this island. He is of Indian descent. We don't really know a lot about his background other than that he's kind of an outsider and that the patriarch of the family looks down on him. But this little group of the liars consider him one of their own. He's just in the mix. And so there's not a lot of nonstop action in this book, and a lot of people on BookTube don't talk about the plot of this book because that's kind of the point, is to figure it out as you go along. But I will say that the main character, Cadence, one summer has some sort of traumatic accident on this island. A couple of years later, she finally returns to the island and she's trying to piece together her memories. After this accident, she suffers from severe migraines, and so she is medicated, she is not well, and her mental state is a bit hazy. The author does a really good job for a young adult book, I thought, in creating some imagery and using some metaphors, and the style of writing kind of put me into Cadence's mindset. This was a solid YA mystery, and I would recommend it. The second book that I read this week was an audiobook, and it was Beartown by Frederick Bachman. This is my second Bachman book. I rated A Man Called Uwe one of my top books of last year, and I will say this book definitely doesn't hold a candle to A Man Called Uwe in my opinion, but I did enjoy it. It's set in Sweden, and we're following a junior ice hockey team as they prepare to compete in the national semifinals. Now, as they are gearing up to this big game, a traumatic sexual assault occurs that involves the star player. And so we see that play out in this very small, close-knit town that is completely devoted to hockey. I will say that the first half of this book was a bit slow for me. I feel like it dragged on and it was a bit redundant. But when I got to the second half of this book, I realized why Bachman did that. The first half of this book is really setting the tone for this town and for the dynamics of all of the people in it. And so it really sets the stage for what happens surrounding this sexual assault. I did find some of this book a bit cliche, and I thought that was a weird juxtaposition with the serious nature of the subject matter. But I will say I'm not of the opinion that the burden of justice is like resting on the shoulders of authors and writers of fiction. I don't think that's what fiction is for, and I can see how if you're of that opinion, you would feel like this book is very problematic. But when I say I enjoyed this book and I was satisfied with how the author wraps up things in the end, that doesn't mean that justice is necessarily served in the appropriate way in this book. But I did enjoy it, and it's not my favorite Bachman, but I've only read 2, so I don't know how it ranks against his other work. I did enjoy a lot of the characters in this book, particularly Kira and Peter, who are the husband and wife in this. I feel like their character development served the story well and provided some insight into life in Beartown versus life outside of Beartown, since Kira is not from there. The third book that I read this week was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. And this book starts with a famous Hollywood actor collapsing on a stage production of King Lear. And someone from the audience jumps up and tries to administer CPR and revive him, but is unsuccessful. After this traumatic event, we'll see that a pandemic breaks out and spreads across the city. And so this is really the last normal day on Earth. Now, you would think this book would be pretty terrifying right now, but even though it deals with a very deadly, virulent pandemic that kills 99.9% of Earth's population, I didn't find this story particularly gripping, and I didn't find it terrifying. I like for stories of post-apocalyptic events or pandemics to really scare me, and this didn't do that. I know that I'm in the minority on this because this book was all the rage a few years back, and it still is in a lot of circles, kind of making the rounds, but I don't know what to say other than at the beginning it had me, and then we're introduced to lots of characters, there are lots of flashbacks, and we follow this traveling symphony in this new post-pandemic world as they travel around. There's no internet, no electricity, no civilization to speak of, and all of these characters are tied together. However, I didn't feel like their connections were particularly moving or interesting. I kept listening, hoping that everything would be tied together in a really unique way. And there were a lot of elements in this book that I liked. They had a cult in it. And so some of it kind of reminded me a little bit of the show The Leftovers, if you've ever seen that, which I loved. But it just never came together for me. I don't really know what else to say about it other than a lot of people loved it. I really didn't enjoy it. And I'm surprised because there are a lot of elements in this book that I enjoy in other books. The next book that I read was Punching the Air by Eva Zoboi. And this is a young adult novel written entirely in verse. It is loosely based on the Central Park Five, who were 5 young Black and Latino teenagers who were wrongfully accused and convicted of the Central Park jogger case. And they spent years incarcerated for a crime that they did not commit. So this is loosely based on that. Our main character's name is Amal, and he is Muslim. He is an artist, he is a poet, and he actually is in a pretty prestigious art school. But he doesn't quite fit in with all of his white peers. He does kind of conflict with some of his teachers because he kind of feels uninterested in the content. He's learning the same old stuff. And so he really feels misunderstood and kind of trapped. Amal's life really takes a turn for the worse when he is caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. There is an argument between some white boys and Amal and his friends at a basketball court, and one of the boys ends up being beaten to the point where he's in a coma. And Amal, just because he was there, he will be convicted of this crime. He spends time in a juvenile detention facility, and that is where the majority of this book comes from. So we get an insight into his inner thoughts and feelings about his circumstances, and I feel like this being written in verse was a very authentic way to express Amal's feelings because he is an artist, he is a poet, and so this was a very effective way to tell this story. I really enjoyed it. There were lots of cool artistic elements to it, and it's a very quick read. The last book that I read this week was As I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. In this book, we're following the Bundren family as they are traveling to Jefferson, Mississippi to bury the remains of the matriarch, Addie. This book is written in stream of consciousness style, and you're getting several different viewpoints. So some of the viewpoints are of Addie and Ance's children, Cash, Darrell, Jewel, Dewey Dell, and Vardaman. Vardaman's sections are probably the most difficult to understand because he is the youngest child in the group, and so from his perspective, when his mother dies and they're traveling with her rotting corpse at least 8 days through some pretty dangerous situations, this is a very traumatic, very confusing situation for him, and so that is reflected in his sections. So I feel like that's a very authentic way to read about this from that child's perspective. So as you're reading, if you are confused, if all of the perspectives are kind of throwing you off and you can't really get into a rhythm, I would just encourage you to continue reading because plot points and things will be explained and clarified in subsequent chapters. This book is the classic Southern Gothic novel, and in my opinion, it was a quicker read and a little bit more accessible than maybe The Sound and the Fury or Absalom. Absalom, some of the words that I wrote down as I was reading this book are dysfunctional, beautiful, grotesque, and visceral. And I think that kind of sums up my feelings about the book. Addie's body and the family are going through kind of a similar breakdown or disintegration throughout this book, and it's one that I'll definitely revisit. Without giving too much away, I will say that Addie has attempted to kind of orchestrate or manipulate this whole journey, and we'll actually see that there are other people in this story who have their own motivations, and the ending was superb. And I did read that William Faulkner had the last line of this book already decided when he started writing it, and I think it was on point. I think one lesson of As I Lay Dying and also Lonesome Dove is you have to be really careful of the promises you make to people who are on their deathbed. Yeah. So as I lay dying, I would recommend this one. It took me almost just one setting to read it. I read it yesterday pretty much in one day. And I can see why this book is on the best 100 reads of all time. The Alchemist, not so much. But this is one that I've read from the poster back there this year that hit the mark. So that's what I read this week. If you guys have read these books and have any comments on them, please shoot me a comment below. Let me know what you thought. This coming week, I'm going to start reading a couple of books. The first one is the book Quiet. It's about introverts. And the second book is a young adult book called The Diviners by Libra Bray. And don't know what else I'll read this week. I'm kind of random with my reading taste, so just depends on what strikes my fancy. But I hope everyone is having a great week, and I will see you in my next video. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you hit the subscribe button and give me a like. Thanks, guys.